Ladies and gentlemen, please join us back in the ballroom. The program will be starting in just a minute. Thank you.
Check. 1, 2. 1, 2. 2. Check.
Ladies and gentlemen, the program will be starting in just under a minute. If you could be so kind as to take your seats, we'd certainly appreciate it. Thank you.
Two.
Properly, we want to partner with you. The new Latin citizen of the developing property. I have incredible songs.
There it goes. It's on, I think they need to turn it up. Hello? I'll give everybody here just a moment to get situated before I start. It amazes me how loud you guys are. It's crazy. It's great, though. It shows that there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of discussion and discourse going on here. In the early 19th century, Bosnia was run by 3 world powers: the French, the Ottomans, and the Austrians. The image that you see right now is the flag of the Habsburg monarch who reigned in Austria at the time. And when Austrians entered into Bosnia, they started collecting data on people and elements of the region. They were trying to get a census, population census, gender, religious beliefs. They were even so meticulous as to going into certain cities like Travnik and counting the number of trees on streets and the type of trees that they were counting. The problem, though, at least that we can see with our 21st century eyes, was that Austria was not collecting this information to try to improve people's lives in Bosnia. They had no regard for dignity or humanity. What they were basically doing was they were counting their assets of a region of the world that they wanted to eventually conquer for themselves. When we fast forward that to today, to the 21st century, when we look at the kind of information and the data that we're collecting, there's a lot of it out there. We're looking at literacy rates, at mortality rates, all kinds of information all around the world, and it's amazing what we can do with that. But for me, as a data visualizer, what I'm constantly trying to do, and what I feel like is a really big challenge for me every day, and I think that's a big challenge for all of us, is how do we visualize, how do we collect data on humanity and visualize humanity and communicate that to people? And one of the things that I try to do is I try to understand behaviors and the way people are behaving on sort of a micro level. This is a piece that we did for Wired magazine, and what it shows, I didn't mean to go forward there. Sorry, let me go back. What this shows is it's a day in the life of non-emergency 311 calls in New York. 311 is a number that you actually call if you have something to complain about that's non-emergency. It starts at midnight, it ends at midnight. And what we have here is we have multi-layers of information. You can actually see when the city of New York is sleeping, when the volume of calls actually decreases. You can see when the city wakes up, it sort of explodes with calls. You can see some obvious things, like the most common thing that people would call to complain about in New York is noise. It's the middle, the pink one. But you also see other things that pose questions, like streetlights in the middle of the day. Why would somebody call to complain about streetlights at lunch? And I think that's sort of the beauty of this piece as well, is we're starting to see, it sort of paints a picture of human interaction and behaviors, which is one sort of small data set. And what happened was the city of New York started logging this data. As people would call in 311, what time did they call? What do they call about? How much information can we collect on this piece? We take this data and we find ways to represent it and visualize it back to a broad audience so that people can digest this and engage with it and understand it. And I think that this ability to sort of understand, like, what are our behaviors? Well, how do we feel? What are our emotions? How can we collect data to actually understand that better? This is another piece that we did together with the Google Data Arts team. It's a much more macro level, but this visualizes small arms and ammunition trade around the world. Historical visualizations to try to understand a little bit more of what's going on with the arms trade race. What's interesting about this, though, is it's not just a tool for research analysts. Obviously, somebody working in a research department would use a very different tool set to try to understand this data. And Google has made a lot of spreadsheet and Excel sort of style graphs so that people can analyze that and make decisions about it. But the problem is our brains don't think in bar graphs and line graphs. Those are very hard to communicate unless we want to cure insomnia. But in this particular case, how do we have something that's visually representative, that's statistically correct, where we can try to communicate something back to an audience so that people can engage within that, so that they can understand the issue at hand of what's going on, so that they can interact with it and explore for themselves what's happening. I think that these are the main challenges. humanity, and in recommunicating this back into a human form. My name is Wesley Grubbs, and I run a data visualization studio in Berkeley. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Wes, for bringing us all to attention and for sharing your ideas and those amazing visuals. I feel like we've all just had the privilege of meeting the Picasso of data. We'll come back, Wes, to some of the points you've raised, but first I'd like to get this plenary session properly started. And to do that, let me welcome you all and say good afternoon. I'm David Bloom from the Harvard School of Public Health, and I have the pleasure of moderating this afternoon's plenary, which is a discussion about conferring dignity while leveraging demographic change. For those of you who are joining us in the audience or via live stream, I encourage everyone to expand this conversation on Twitter using the GPF hashtag GPF14, and also the GPF handle @GPF.org. I have 3 goals in mind for this plenary session. First, I'd like to make sure that everyone learns a few facts they didn't already know about demographic change. Second, I want us to explore some of the challenges that are posed by those facts. And third, I want this session to provide a strong foundation for the people track at this forum, including the working groups that are going to take place in the coming days, and also the informal and the serendipitous discussions for which the forum is so rightly famous. To further the achievement of these goals, I'm joined by 3 knowledgeable and terrifically inspiring panelists. I'll keep the introductions brief because their full bios are all in the conference program book. But to my, at the far end of the stage from me, we have Kennedy Odede. Kennedy's the founder and the CEO of Shining Hope for Communities. Shining Hope currently serves over 50,000 people living in the Kibera slum of Nairobi, which is where Kennedy grew up, as I think we'll hear. Shining Hope delivers services and life guidance to these people, okay, and is notably driven by their, that is the slum dwellers, innovative ideas and entrepreneurial spirit. Sitting next to Kennedy is Tsitsi Matsiiwa. Tsitsi is the executive chairperson of the Higher Life Foundation. The Higher Life Foundation champions the delivery of a holistic approach to the growth and development of orphaned and vulnerable children in Africa, children who the foundation refers to as history makers. And finally, sitting to my immediate left is Toby Porter. Toby's the CEO of HelpAge International. HelpAge is a global network of organizations working to help older men and women claim their rights, challenge discrimination, and overcome poverty and insecurity. Now, before I turn to the panelists, I'd like to give you all a very brief 2 or 3 minute introduction to global demographic change. I know from previous meetings of the Global Philanthropy Forum that everyone here is very, very good at filling in empty spaces and connecting the dots. So I'm just going to set out 5 sets of facts that I think reflect some of the most important demographic changes of our day. Fact 1. World population now stands at 7.2 billion people, and it's projected to surpass 9 billion by the year 2050. 9 billion represents 3 times the 3 billion figure that the world reached in 1960. So that's a 6 billion increase from 3 to 9 in less than a century. That would be the equivalent, just to jar your imaginations a bit, the equivalent of adding 3 populations, the combined size of China and India, the world's 2 population superpowers. I also would note here that the increase is not a uniformly global phenomenon, okay? It has been and it will continue to be heavily, disproportionately concentrated in the socially, the politically, the economically, and the ecologically most fragile countries and regions of the world. Fact 2. In 1950, the average woman in the world had 5 children over the course of her childbearing years. Today, that figure is sharply lower. It now stands at 2.5 children per woman. Okay, and please keep in mind also that there is a great deal of heterogeneity out there. There are still some populations in which women are having upwards of 6 and 7 children over the course of their childbearing years. And those are offset by the countries in which fertility has dropped as low as 1 child per woman, which is well under the long-run replacement rate of 2.1. Fact 3. Since 1950, global life expectancy increased by 2 decades. Okay, and it's expected to rise perhaps another decade by the time we get to 2050. To put that in context, please consider that throughout most of human history, people lived to somewhere between 25 and 30 years on average. And now, in the last 6 decades alone, we've added 20 years to life expectancy. That's basically that life expectancy has increased 8 hours per day for the last 60 years on average. Okay, that's what I would call a longevity revolution, and I would say that it ranks among the most remarkable achievements in human history. Fact 4. Fact 4 has to do with population aging. Okay, today, there are on the order of 800 million old people in the world, where old is defined, and I say this with apologies, it's defined as age 60 and over. That represents about 11% of global population. That figure, that 11% figure, has been relatively stable in the past few decades, but it's about to increase very sharply. Okay, so between now and the year 2050, that 11% is going to turn into 22%, and the 800 million I just mentioned is going to become 2 billion people aged 60 and over. And I can tell you also that every single country in the world will be a participant in the process. And we're talking here, when we talk about population aging, we're talking about an unprecedented change for the world. There are no examples or prior stages of history to which we can look for guidance on the challenges that population aging will pose. And finally, I have fact 5 for you. Fact 5 has to do with urbanization. So as of 2008, just a few years ago, for the first time in history, more people were living in urban areas than rural areas in the world. And that growth of urban areas basically involves the growth of cities, of megacities, of hypercities, of slums, the issues that it raises that have to do with anonymity, congestion, loneliness, communicable disease, pollution, crime, infrastructure, social services. These all come to mind as related challenges. And especially notable here is that of the roughly 3.5 billion people that live in urban areas in the world, over 1 billion are living under extremely squalid conditions that we call slums. So enough facts for now. What I'd like to do is turn to the panel and to hear some of their thoughts. And I'm going to start, Kennedy, with you. I understand that you grew up in a slum, in Kibera, actually. And I was hoping you'd just start off by telling us how you got there and describing the experience.
Thank you so much. So I want to share a story of urbanization. My parents came from rural village in Kenya, so they were looking for opportunities. So they went to the city, Nairobi, to look for a job, and then end up in the slum. There's no job. Their life was so hard. That's where I grew up. I remember in our house, we are the most poorest people in Kibera. It was a really hard life. Kibera can be compared to the size of Central Park. Live over 1 million people. There's no government schools inside. There's no running water, and there is no upstall. So life is really, really hard. But one thing that I still remember was that my mother was very strong. My father gave up in life, so he became abusive and really struggling. But my mother was the one going out to look for food for us. But my mother, when we used to survive on porridge and water, my mom, other kids could come to our house, and I was so mad. Like, why, Mom, are we having these kids here? And she told me, Kennedy, it's not about being rich or being poor. It's about sharing. So that's something I took. So at the age of 10, I was a homeless kid. I ran away from the house where your mom cannot give you food. Life is so hard. So I stayed on the street for 2 years, using drugs, feeling hopelessness. At the age of 17, I read a book of Martin Luther King Jr. that really gave me dignity and hope. Somebody poor like me wanted to change his life and the life of his community. So I was so inspired. And that's the time that I got a job in the factory, earning $1 for 10 hours. Every time I was going to the factory, I was crying and saying, how long will I survive here? Will it be 5 years? Will it be 10 years? The rest of my life? Because it was a really dangerous job I was doing. So one day I'm coming back home, and I found my friend has been shot dead by the police. His name is Boy. The same month, my other friend Calvin's has hanged himself in a 10 by 10 shack with a note written, "I can't live this life anymore." That's not enough. What really touched me most was when my sister, at the age of 15, was raped and became pregnant. Put in mind that at the age of 15, my mother had me at the age of 15. My sister now, at the age of 15, is also now pregnant. And I call this the cycle of poverty. And I say, enough is enough. This is too much. I can't bear this. From my job, I bought a soccer ball, which was to be used as a mobilization effort. So I came back to the community, and I told people, you know what? We have to stand up for ourselves. Nobody going to help us. And that was dignity. They told me, Kennedy, do you have any donor or NGO will help you? And I say, no, this is a movement. This is a dignity. We're going to come together in this community. We wear the shoes, we know why it's pinching us. And that gave dignity. It gave hope. And the movement was formed. Then later on, what happened, I was lucky, miracle happened. I got a scholarship. I went back to the US, to Wesleyan University. Keep in mind, I never went to school because of poverty. Being at Wesleyan, I was able to go back home to build a movement, scalability, whereby we can have a school for girls, but at the same time connect to other social services. So right now, we are serving over 70,000 people in Kibera. And we are now also starting another project in Mathare, because it has to be moved, it has to be initiated by the community itself.
So, Kennedy, unless I'm missing something very fundamental, you just described the experience of a young boy and a man growing up in Kibera. What can you tell us about the experience of girls and young women in that setting?
What happened, to be honest with you, I learned about feminism when I came to the US. What was happening was people like my mom, strong women in the community, not respected. So that's what drove me to start an initiative that really will start with women as a way. So, and what happened to my sister? So for me, it became personal. And that's what I use in the community to inspire more people. Say, look what happened to our moms, our sisters. They really took it personal. And that's why I was allowed to have a school for girls in the slum. So, and as you know that in poverty, when there's a hard life, most people who suffer mostly are women and girls. I say at the age of 13, I see children trading their body, not for money, but for food. At the same time, you can't blame. It's really hard. Life and the system has pushed them to the wall. And that's why we said, enough is enough. We are starting a movement, not an NGO. And a movement comes when people want their dignity. When you feel that you've been pushed in a corner, and a change must happen.
So, Kennedy, I appreciate your sharing your story because for many of us, you're basically allowing us to peer into a world that we don't normally get to see. So thank you for sharing in that way. My question is, I want to understand a little bit more about how you got out of Kibera. How did you actually come to apply to Wesleyan? How did you get a scholarship? How many years did you spend there? Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Oh, yeah. So after spending 5 years working in our movement in Kibera, I met my wife, who by then came to do what is called study abroad programs, and I told her my story and my dream, because I wanted to build something that will not only be in Kibera, but in the informal urban settlement. And I said, for me to achieve this goal, I will need education. So she helped me to apply as a joke. I was not sure. I'm like, okay, let me try. And I ended up getting a scholarship, which I never believed will happen, you know. And then when I get to the US, I was like, no. Now I have to think bigger than Kibera. You know what I mean? And it was really, honestly, is that I was looking for opportunity. What people look in communities, even though they're poor, they are looking for opportunity, like any other kid. So when I got that opportunity, I wonder how I can share it back. So I went back in the Kibera, and it became also a little bit of hope, people to see that I'm able to come back. And that's how we were able to build this organization.
Okay, one more question, Kennedy. So as I understand it, Shining Hope works not just in Kibera, but in other slums, and it aspires to do even more work in
Yeah.
other slum communities in Kenya and elsewhere in Africa in the years to come. How representative is the experience in Kibera of other slum communities that you know about or have read about or have visited or have worked in?
Yeah, what's happening, the issue of urbanization is becoming a big issue right now. As I said before, in Nairobi, more than 50% of people live in the slums. And they share, they share the same struggle. It can be a different demographic, but if you go, it's the same hardship people are passing through. Education, people want to have a better life, better healthcare. Is an issue. And that's why, and I believe that it has to be driven by the people in those communities. That's when you're going to have real change.
Okay. So thank you, Kennedy, for getting us started here. Tsitsi, if I can turn to you now. So you had the Higher Life Foundation, and your focus is on a very different demographic than Kennedy's, mainly orphans. So what can you tell us about the nature of the insecurities and the vulnerabilities faced by orphan children in the settings in which you work?
Thank you very much, David. Working with orphan children is such an eye-opening experience. I get to really touch the insecurities, the emotional challenges, and also the desires that they have that they don't necessarily have an opportunity to express. Majority of the orphan children in the countries that I work in, that is Zimbabwe, Burundi, Lesotho, South Africa, majority of them have never actually had any emotional support outside of, if there's some single orphaned, which means there's one parent who's alive. Some are double orphans, in which case both parents have passed on. So most of the countries don't really have any support, meaningful support that is given to a child once they've lost their parent. They don't have opportunities to mourn. They don't have opportunities to share what they are feeling, what they are going through. Majority of the orphaned children are from HIV/AIDS, which still to this day, there's a negative attitude and there's a stigma on being an orphan, especially if your parents have died from AIDS-related diseases. So you find that you are dealing with individuals that you really need to get the best out of. You need to reach out more than just giving physical assistance, but you need to touch the heart of the person to get the best out of them and then create a platform where they can really be able to express themselves and also express their ideals through the kind of interventions we give. So I think basically that's I would say the perspective of the kind of children that we are working with.
Why do you refer to those children as history makers? Where did that term come from? What does it mean?
When you call somebody an orphan, there are all sorts of generally negative connotations to the word. People, I noticed when I started going into the communities, I went to a remote orphanage and thought, let me spend a few days there. Let me sit with the children, eat what they eat, sleep in the environment, wake up and have some kind of personal experience so that I can really connect with them. So from that, there were observations I made that if you refer to them as an orphan, it was a negative way of, communicating and describing their situation. So when I got back to my office, I thought, now, what's the best way in which we can describe really what we want to build, what we want to see within this person? And somebody came up with the word history maker. And we all agreed it had good, positive, powerful, strong message, strong connotation. So we started calling them history makers. And what we found was they liked that because it gave them a positive identity. It empowered them. It also played a key role in us making the interventions to these children tangible, impactful. and positive in the way that they could identify with and in a way that we could say to ourselves there is a positive change from how the child was before to how they see themselves, how they carry themselves, how they communicate and interact with the community.
I think we all like the term and the thinking behind it, and I think we're all going to adopt it, no pun intended. So Tsitsi, you spoke a little bit a few moments ago about dealing with fears, people's fears, touching people's hearts. Where does faith and spirituality figure in your approach to dealing with orphans and vulnerable children?
You know, something that is very interesting about dealing with our history makers, whether they are our history makers or history makers in other countries that we don't have a direct relationship with, you find that there's always an aspect in the way, I think the way they see themselves, the way they interact in the communities. If you can just go back to the question again, so I can relate it.
I'm just wondering where faith and spirituality, what role it plays, how prominent is it?
Yeah, there always is an importance to being sensitive to the culture and the religious beliefs. Every African child or family believes in something. And openly confessing your faith is very usual. It's very normal. And it's something that is, people expect you to do. If you don't have any faith, they feel like there's something missing. So faith plays part and parcel of how you relate to the child or to the individual. Now, we happen to be in some of the countries where they're generally Christian. Now, when I say Christian, it can be anything from the traditional church to different types of churches. All it means is that they believe in God, right? Then you have in other communities where there's Muslims and Christians. But the fundamental thing that we are conscious about is respecting the fact that people believe in something. Also, it plays a very important part in nurturing the child, in connecting with the child, because that's where you find you become the parent to the history maker. You become not just a provider of a scholarship or a provider of some of the things we give them, of a lantern or a food pack. You actually become somebody who, to some extent, is accountable and responsible for the upbringing of the child. So the spirituality aspect plays a key role in the healing of the child. It plays a key role in building confidence. It plays a key role in them having a long-term connection and relationship with you. It's part and parcel of what you believe in. If you don't believe in anything, you will struggle having that personal connection with the child.
Yeah, I'm glad that you've brought up this notion of connection because actually we just heard Kennedy's comments about the importance of role models and mentors and scholarship opportunities that helped him get out of Kibera and actually have ultimately led him back into Kibera, although in a different capacity. How do those kinds of factors, mentors and role models, how does that figure in the approach that you take to dealing with history makers?
Mentors are a critical and important part of the nurturing and the helping and interacting with the child. When I talk about mentors, I'm talking teachers. The teachers play a role in building confidence in the child, not only providing education, but also looking out for anything that may be abnormal or something that may be of concern. We find people, community leaders and church members also play a very important part. We have a program that actually gives allowances to church pastors to encourage them to stay in the rural areas so that they can also be on the lookout for the children that we give assistance to. Because remember what I said earlier, that for governments, support for psychological support and services like that just don't exist. So the mentor plays an important role. And we actively work and build strong relationships with the mentors to help us in making sure that we get information on the children, our data has integrity, and also that they have confidence in being, honest and being open about some of the insecurities or the negative experiences they may have. We are dealing with very vulnerable children, like a point that Kennedy mentioned. They can be raped, they can be abused. So you need to have those mentors who are honest, who can be able to really be able to discern, is the child a possibility of being in a place where they are being victimized or abused, or there's a possibility of rape. So in that regard, we not only are the mentors, like I said, important, but we need to really also have a genuine, close and working relationship with the mentors to ensure that that connection with the children is, it's a good and a strong relationship.
Okay, thank you, Tsitsi. Toby, I'm going to ask you to be patient for just a couple of minutes. What I'd like to do is take just a few minutes to ask if anyone in the audience has a comment or a question for Tsitsi or Kennedy. If so, please raise your hand, and if I can see you, I'll try to point to you. So yeah, please, I think we have one here. Do we have a microphone going around? Good. Please introduce yourself, and let's try to keep our questions concise. And if you have someone you're addressing a question to, please make that clear as well.
Okay, hi, this is Asha from Palo Alto, California, from the Motwani Jadeja Family Foundation. One of the things I stumbled upon recently, in regard to Professor Bloom's question about spirituality, is the Goldie Hawn Foundation in Los Angeles, which works exclusively with, I think, with inner city kids and with orphanages and places where there have been at-risk kids, and very explicitly uses tools like meditation and quiet time and things like that in connecting the kids and empowering them internally, and with their mentors using prayer and using meditation and some very interesting tools. I'm sure all the information is on the Goldie Hawn Foundation, but I thought I'll just make that connection for you, because I think the results have been staggering. So it's an important point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's see, I have a question here, if we can direct a microphone. Oh, sorry, gentleman here and then the woman there, sorry.
Hi, I'm Dan Robbins again, Kapnick Trust, Zimbabwe. We also work in Zimbabwe on orphans and vulnerable children, and currently have around 12,000 kids in a preschool orphan support programming. We've been pleased with kind of results of I'm a pediatrician myself with my day job, and play therapy, basically. I mean, here we often had kids work with a psychologist to do play therapy to work out a lot of the trauma that they've been through. I'm just curious of your experiences. We've found that actually just getting them into a preschool setting and playing has turned out to be a very powerful tool. Obviously, prayer and religion in Zimbabwe is very powerful itself, whatever religion is in that area as dominant. But I'm just curious if that's a model that you've worked with. I guess we can talk about a little later, but I'm just curious what your model has been. But play with it, I was just blown away, because initially bedwetting, we were having people, can you send bedwetting alarms? How do you, all these kids are staying with their grandparents or aunts or uncles, are peeing everywhere, ticking everybody off, and literally those requests stopped as kids were stopping wetting in bed because they were playing. And I just have been so amazed by that aspect, as well as kind of that spiritual part has also seemed to be very important. And as an aside, I just want to thank Kennedy, and nice work, Wesleyan. That's a great accomplishment, but also, I'm kidding, my kids are at college. But also just very inspiring, and I appreciate that window into your life, because I do think we get, as much as I have the opportunity to go a couple times a year, it just is inspiring to see what you've done and to hear your story, so thank you.
Thank you. I think I had invited a comment from back here.
Hi, thank you. I'm Lisa Bomer with the Conrad and Hilton Foundation. I had a quick question for Kennedy. Kennedy, in your travels meeting other folks living in similar slum situations, What insights do you have as to how we might support more entrepreneurs, more grassroots leaders such as yourself? I know you meet people, you talk, you inspire them. They're not all going to go to Wesleyan. What guidance, what advice would you have to those of us that would seek to support other emerging leaders like yourself? Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, that's a very good question. As I travel a lot in Kenya and other countries, meeting, I went to Liberia and other places. So what's happening that I've learned is that there is two different worlds. There's a donor and there's a people who are doing something. And most of the time, it's so sad, they don't. Is it? Okay. Most that's okay? Okay. Most of the time, they don't communicate well. There is no, what's going on? Huh? There's no listening. You know what I mean? And sometimes donor will be like, I want you to do A, B, C, D. It doesn't work on the community grassroots level. You know what I mean? It's good to listen. And I think the one way of the dignity is when you listen. When you listen to the people, when you understand the community, how they're doing their thing, what they're looking for, they're not looking for handouts. They are for looking for opportunity. You know, and we have to understand that. So it's not sad. I feel lucky a little bit, to be honest, that I was able to be in another world, at the same time grassroots. So I'm able to learn these two worlds. It is always hard. I remember I didn't know how to write a proposal. There's nobody who wanted to listen to me. But when I went to the States and I learned their game, you know what I mean, and how things work, I was able to combine that with the grassroots level. I also tell the people on the grassroots level this: don't wait for the donors. Do your thing. Your work gonna shine, you're gonna attract people. If you wait, they're gonna tell you to another direction. You have to be focused what you want to do. And that's my message to every community I go to, that they're the one driving it. They're the one owning it. And that's the dignity. So donors will just do what? Partner. They come as partners. 50-50, yeah?
I think we just got one of our takeaway messages about don't wait for the donors. So thank you, Kennedy. Okay, Toby, you definitely get the award for being the most patient panelist. But now I think it's time that everyone have a chance to hear from you. So you deal with older people. That's a very different demographic than slum dwellers and history makers that we've already heard a bit about. What do you see as the most important issues facing aging populations?
Well, I think I want to start, actually, David, just by asking a question of the audience rather than talking to. I'm from the UK, so you know we're very polite over there. So I just want to ask, would you put your hand up if you're either over 60 or if you'd like to be over 60 one day? So you should all be passionate advocates for the rights and the inclusions of older people. But I was looking through these flares, and I was looking for the silver one, yeah? And I couldn't find it anywhere. And I was thinking, if I made one myself and I put it on my suit and walked around for the rest of the day saying, does anyone want to have breakfast with me tomorrow to talk about older age and older people? I would wager that I would breakfast alone for the second morning in a row. And this is one of the great sort of enigmas and paradoxes is you know, the population aging, the reality of longer, healthier lives is a triumph. It's a triumph of global development. It's a triumph of national development. And yet, none of us really like to talk about it, and none of us really like to think too much about it. And as a result of that, I think that we miss opportunities to include older people in our thinking, in our programs, in our projects, and that leads to terrible levels of disempowerment and discrimination, and really removing people's dignity, which is the theme that we're talking about. So, I mean, I'll just give some examples. I mean, one one area recently that a lot of data simply stops at 49 and over. Yeah, so we, for many years, HIV/AIDS data didn't go beyond the age of 50. So this was something that we took up, and for the first time this year, it was actually measured, and 3.2 million people living with HIV/AIDS suddenly appeared for the first time. You know, it's extraordinary that when in this reality of very long lives that people would say, well, 49 and over, and just, but that's one of the key underlying reasons. In humanitarian relief, you know, HelpAge is a very proud laureate of the Hilton Humanitarian Prize, and yet we would be the first to admit that we haven't succeeded in really influencing to anywhere near the extent needed the general practice of the humanitarian community in terms of bringing older people into the mainstream of humanitarian relief. And whether the reality now for many humanitarian operations, it's not just about malaria and reducing the risk of cholera, it's about diabetes treatment, and it's about hypertension, it's about, you know, this is the new reality. There are 70,000 refugees from Syria who are aged 65 and over. And the people that we're working with in the camps of Jordan and in the host communities of Lebanon are having urgent medical needs because the systems that we have simply aren't out there responding to elements of non-communicatable disease. It's just not in the lexicon of humanitarian relief at this point in time. Older people have, despite ample studies that shows that, you know, rates of repayment and success rates in microcredit programs work very well with the older segment of population, there is still a huge challenge about financial inclusion of older people that is only just beginning to be understood. So it's a huge area, but I would say that, you know, older people isn't a uniform segment, obviously. There are the same variables that impact on every other aspect of demography, impact on age as well. But the fact of older age always seems to be an element that increases vulnerability, that increases the chance of being slightly discriminated, slightly ignored, slightly not heard, slightly patronized, slightly typecast, or which in any situation makes a situation worse than it should be, worse than it needs to be. So for society as a whole, incidentally, I mean, we're trying very hard that the Sustainable Development Goals, what everyone assumes will replace the Millennium Development Goals, and I'll be a very interested attendee at the session tomorrow morning. We're just hoping very hard that they are met, that the world can come up with a set of indicators and targets and goals that actually work for people of all ages. We're not after a whole separate set of goals and norms for older people. We just don't want older people to be excluded because it doesn't make sense. It's unjust, it's undemocratic, and in the light of the trends that David says, it's absolutely profoundly idiotic to carry on ignoring a segment of population that really now is 22% and higher in many countries. So I think you know, it's an enormous subject, but I suppose I would just end by saying that it sort of boils down to often a lot of questions, and I think that you know, how long will I live? How long will I live well? How long will I live healthily? Will I retire? When will I retire? What if I don't want to retire? Will I be able to go on working? Not if you work for the UN, unfortunately. You have a mandatory retirement age, I think, isn't it, Khalid, of 63 or something? And this is the body that we're looking to lead a bright new dawn of older rights. what are my expectations and entitlements from my state? How should I interact with younger people? How will the older segment and the younger segment not be in competition, but be in collaboration over dividing the economic and social pie? How will health and social systems develop that work for me? So that's...
Okay, so you talked about vulnerability, you talked about disempowerment, discrimination, you raised some health issues that have to do with infectious disease as well as non-communicable disease. You talked about the gaps in global protection for older people and maybe the absence of a global champion in the UN system for the rights of older people. Are these mainly problems of the wealthy industrial countries, the Japans and the North Americas and the Western Europe, or do the challenges of population aging go further than that?
No, I mean, that's, I thought was very clear from what you said. I mean, at the moment, there's about 9% of the world's population is, 10% is over 60, and that will be 22% in 2050. But the regions that are aging quickest, and in fact quickest ever in human history, is Southeast Asia, is Latin America, and there are enormous problems. And there's a phrase that many countries are growing old before they got rich. Now in the developed world, we're wrestling with enormous challenges of adaptation. How do we adapt pensions? How do we adapt healthcare? How do we adapt society, if you like, to deal with longer lives? But what about in countries where there's no real sort of pension or health system architecture or infrastructure there in the first place? I mean, this has not been done before. So yeah.
For example, I mean, we've heard a lot about the experience in Africa in a slightly, not with respect to aging populations, but I mean, how does Africa differ from, Brazil, Latin America, Southeast Asia, with respect to the experience of aging, with respect to the institutions, with respect to the challenges that population aging creates?
Yeah, I think, I mean, in Africa, the numbers of older people will increase faster in Africa over the next 100 years, over this century, than any other region. But obviously that's due to the overall demographic trend in Africa. But at the moment, I think at the beginning of this century, there are 50 million people in Africa over 50. That's projected to increase to 760 million by the end of this century. So while it's absolutely right and obvious that Africa should currently focus on the youth bulge, today's youth bulge is tomorrow's age bulge. So there's no, the development community and philanthropy has to be able to deal with the reality of more than one age group and more than one segment at any point in time. These are the realities we all live. The idea of multi-generation sharing a household is the thing. But one thing I'd like to say, David, because I read this on the plane coming over, is that I think the interesting thing about aging is no one really has the answer at the moment. The West is tremendously challenged, and in Africa and Asia, people are tremendously challenged. So I read yesterday on the paper coming over from Heathrow, and the headline was, as you know, it was on page 2, and it said, "Britain should learn from Asians and Africans about caring for elderly." And I remember reading last week that the Deputy PM of Japan had just been quoted as saying older people should hurry up and die. 4 months ago, the UK Health Secretary said the UK should adopt the Asian culture of caring for the elderly. And then the Guardian columnist from Seoul in South Korea wrote an op-ed the next day saying, "I've lived in South Korea for 5 years, and I wish I could say I've been struck by reverence and respect. Instead, I've been struck by frightening poverty and neglect among older people whose living conditions are miserable." The, if you like, stereotype picture of the Asian family, all living in one hamlet is not the reality of Asia. It's not the reality of Latin America. It won't be the reality in Africa because of things. I just don't think anyone knows. I mean, in China, just to introduce a light-hearted note, but it illustrates just how few answers there are, that they've just implemented in June the elderly rights law, and it's not a bill of rights like HelpAge would like to see. It's a law that orders adult children to visit their aging parents twice a year. I mean, it's like, you know, no one knows what to do about aging. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Let me try to connect up our discussions a little bit. So, Kennedy, let's go back to Kibera for a moment. What's the experience of an older person living in Kibera?
So, to be honest, you rarely find them. But if you find them, they are the wise people. You feel privileged to sit down with them, to get the wisdom, how they saw life before, and you know, so they are really respected. You know what I mean? Although the environment doesn't really favor old people, you know, there's ditches, you know, you have to jump, you know, so life is hard in the slum. And many people, for example, people that I grew up with, most of them are dead. I mean, so, for example, people in Kibera, for example, population is over 15 years old, they're the majority, you know what I mean?
So is it fair to say that you think of older people as a resource in slum communities?
Yeah. And we call them every time you reach some, I wouldn't say which age, this is America. When you reach there, you are becoming the elder. You are a woman or you are a man.
And so now what about with respect to dealing with the history makers? I mean, do you regard older people as an asset when it comes to the work that your foundation does, Tsitsi?
Definitely older people, not just with regards to the history makers, but culturally.
Yeah.
There's a lot of respect and honor in being elderly. Also, I don't know what HelpAge research will show, but I mean, from our president is 90, I think. Irrespective of what we may have, you know, regarding what you think of political position and what have you for that age, there's a lot of respect in how people communicate and deal with elderly people. Also for orphaned children, old people have found themselves being their mothers and the ones taking care of the orphaned children, which is very unfortunate because it's extremely difficult for them. My colleague from Zimbabwe mentioned the importance of playing and, you know, the kind of things that a child needs. And it's such a burden on the elderly because now they have that extra responsibility to be young parents to children that, you know, there's a generation gap. Not only that, the energy levels are low. Most of them are sickly and are not on any type of medication. So there are challenges with that regard, but you know, we take our hats off and we respect and really honor elderly people. Yeah.
So Toby, I presume that it kind of makes you feel good to hear how older people are revered and viewed as an asset in these communities. And I mean, what's your vision for intergenerational relations and the contribution that older people can make? And what do we need to do to manage and maximize the return on that asset?
I just think we need a level playing field that just treats every human life as equally important. You know, I worked, by the way, until October for Save the Children for 10 years. And you know, I absolutely celebrate all of the interest and philanthropy and passion for education. And indeed, you know, by 2050, which is the time frame that most of us talk about in terms of illustrating this demographic change, the critical thing that it's not going to be focusing on today's older people that will lead societies to have adapted successfully. It's educating their young people today, living healthy lives, having healthcare systems that work for prevention, not just for curative, that deal with NCD, not just for infectious. So I think that what's needed, David, is just a holistic view and a sophistication in the development and philanthropic community that actually allows us to see society and families and contributions as it is. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Toby. Let's open the floor up for a few more comments and questions. I have one right here.
My name is Lorene Arbus. So one statistic that no one of any age escapes, at least in this country, is that the largest minority in this country are people with disability, and that includes everyone of every age. I don't know what the statistics would be in other countries, but I can't imagine it's that far off. So a few years ago, I commissioned research, underwrote research, to find out how many children in foster care have disability. There were a lot of reasons for my wanting to research that. And I imagine it probably would translate into orphans and orphanages as well. The statistic was 70%. Huge, and an unknown fact, actually. So my question is, you must be up against dealing with this, and I would love to know whether your country's cultural stigmas make it something even more reprehensible that you cannot begin to even deal with, or if there are ways and how you have found the way.
Tsitsi?
It's an excellent question. We realized, although our major focus is on orphaned children, but when we went to the schools, because we go to see the children, we noticed that our children walk very long distances. We had children who had, one leg and a wooden leg, walking 5 kilometers to school. Some children being carried by siblings to get to school because they have no wheelchairs. Even if you have a wheelchair, the terrain is so rough that it's impossible. What drove the children is the desire to go to school. Then others couldn't hear, simply because something was either lodged in the ear or they were born, with hearing problems. The challenges in developing countries is there is such a stretch on the resources that you find if you don't have a champion who's paying attention to the minorities like the disabled, very little will be done. There's very little from policies that help to identify and give the necessary assistance, to schools being, putting structures that are sensitive to the needs of the disabled. So we ended up setting up a scholarship program that not only gives educational scholarships to the children, but also those who need operations. We partner with doctors who once a year will come look at children with eye problems, hearing problems, disabilities. Some have heart conditions. We've begun to send quite a number of children to India for surgery. You, as a philanthropist, what you find, I think, is you can't afford to say the money that I have, the budget is only for scholarships. You end up using it for whatever the need is. And also bringing awareness so that in the long term, when governments are able to, at least they will put in policies the right policies, or have debates going around to bring awareness and to bring people to become conscious of those in need, especially the minorities. So we do what we can, but it's definitely we do have specific interventions for the disabled. One of the things I would love to see is job opportunities. To partner with companies to bring awareness so that there's some jobs that the disabled can easily be, given opportunities to do and be trained to do, like running call centers. It's one of the causes that I've taken on myself, that in our company, why should able-bodied people only be given the opportunities for call centers? Why not make call centers available for the disabled, and then those with able-bodied can do other forms of work as well. So again, it's the point of having a champion to speak out and then follow through to make sure that at least something is done in the short term.
Okay, thank you, TC. I think we have time for one more comment or question, and then I'm going to try to wrap up. So this, right here in front, this young woman. Can we have a microphone here? Thank you.
Hi, this is Asha again. I think there's what I'm working in the field of education and non-formal learning. I do see unprecedented opportunity for the senior, elderly people, especially with good amounts of education, to really play a significant role in non-formal learning, which is outside. Most of you who are aware with the TED Prize that was given to Professor Shugata Mitra for School in the Cloud, there are grannies. He has established Granny Cloud, where the grannies are Skyping in from England, you know, and they are teaching these kids, and it is staggering how much their health has improved. Because suddenly they have purpose and meaning in their life, and there's no this question of, oh, do we provide diabetic care? Do we provide this for the senior? They are on the road. I mean, they just seem to have a mission. And I've seen some of these grannies Skyping into India, and it's just amazing what this has done to their health and well-being. And I wonder if there are platforms or programs that are working on this in a systematic way.
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I think that interaction between older members of the community and younger members of the community is a sort of obvious area that will benefit the society as a whole. It already goes on a lot anyway. In terms of structured schemes, I mean, I've heard of these things. I mean, all I'd say to your point is, you know, your grannies on the Skype, their capacity, their ability to contribute was always there. That wasn't. It was only that someone finally had the foresight to actually offer them a chance to make it available, and that's the challenge that we have as society. It's not like we're doing older people a massive favor. There's this enormous pool of social capital that about their ability to contribute knowledge and time and compassion and wisdom and economic output to society, and it's just the fact that our attitudes and our open-mindedness hasn't evolved to the same extent to keep up with the demographic change. So it's like all of us need to just get grannies on the Skype or the equivalent in terms of, yeah.
Okay, thank you for the question, and Toby, thank you for the answer. I think it's time to start wrapping up the session, which I've enjoyed. And I have to say that in listening to the dialogue, I'm reminded of a kind of a famous quote from Winston Churchill when he commented on the difference between pessimists and optimists. And what Churchill said, if I recall correctly, is that a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity, whereas an optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. So by way of a kind of a closing 30-second remark, if we can keep it to that, I wanted to ask each of you if you would just tell us whether you classify yourself as an optimist or a pessimist in Churchill's sense of the word, and why. So, and Toby, I think we're going to start with you.
Yeah, a massive optimist. The economic and social value of a rapidly growing, healthy older population is an immense resource for all societies and countries in the world.
Okay, thank you. So we have a 2 thumbs up optimist here. Good. Tsitsi?
I'm the ultimate optimist in terms of if the youth they know what the solutions are. We just need to give them the platform, hear their voices, stimulate debate and discussions, and we can solve the problems.
Okay, so we have the ultimate optimist, and now can you top that, Kennedy?
I think I've been pushed by life, kind of transformed me a lot, whereby I have to really work hard to know that if I don't stand up for myself, nobody will be there for me. So wherever way you can put that, that's who I am. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so thank you all for your comments and questions, and especially the panelists. I actually want to take a few minutes before we break to attempt to give a little bit of a summary of my key takeaways from this session, if I can read my scroll here. The first takeaway is the observation that demographic change is really shaking up the world. From history makers in slums to old and very old people to dissatisfied adolescents and young adults. These groups are large, they're very much in flux, and they are significantly redefining and reshaping the nature and the contours of human experience. The second takeaway I would offer is the confirmation that demography is not destiny. This is a point that we heard earlier from Khalid Malik of the UNDP. And I feel came across in this session, that our demographic future is not set in stone. And I think we also got a glimpse of the view that not only is the demographic future not set in stone, but the implications of demographic change aren't set in stone either. We actually began to see that we have lots of options to shape our demographic trajectory and also to respond to it. And here I would actually underscore Wesley Grubb's, I guess we went from Wesley to Wesleyan, but anyway, Wesley Grubb's earlier comments on the power of data to help us understand the challenges and to devise solutions, especially when the data are collected and analyzed in a way that preserves human dignity. And I think that Tsitsi also reiterated that in her comments about collecting qualitative data on children and staying in touch and finding out what's actually driving them. The final takeaway that I have basically deals with the very interesting concepts that we heard through the last hour, concepts describing feelings that came up during the various comments. At one extreme, we heard about things like powerlessness and hopelessness and urgency and despair and tears and insecurity and stigma and uncertainty and disempowerment and discrimination. I'm just trying to keep a list of these as we went along. A feeling of being trapped would be another. Then at the other extreme, we heard about feelings like that of hope and sharing and inspiration and happiness and self-reliance, leadership, caring, strength, touching people's hearts, connecting with them, faith, opportunity, social capital, compassion. This is a longer list, I'm happy to say. Wisdom, open-mindedness, having a level playing field. I think that the challenge for all of us is to take advantage of those concepts and those ideas, and also and especially the energy and ideas of thought leaders and doers like Wesley and like Kennedy, Tsitsi, and Toby. The challenge is to harness human ingenuity and to bet on young people, because I think that's what Tsitsi's advising us to do, and to collaborate in a way that promotes and protects human dignity in an all too harsh and often unforgiving world. So on that note, I did have one more announcement, and that is that we'll thank the speakers in just a moment, but before we do that, I've been asked to invite everyone to shift our focus to a short musical interlude by Gary Malkin and Rafael Bejarno.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a gift to you all, the instrument that I'm about to play is more than 1,000 years old. It's a gift from the land of Mexico, and it was found in a sacred place where our ancestors bring their offerings to the Mother Earth. So to honor our ancestors, honor the future generations, and remembering we are the ancestors of the future. Thank you. Thank you.
Join me in expressing admiration for Toby, Tsitsi, and Kennedy, and also appreciation for their remarks. Thank you.